Hello and welcome to Extra Minutes, the 60 Minutes podcast. I'm Adam Hegarty, joined by producer Anne Worthington.
Hi.
Anne, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
You and I, we've done a lot of work on the harms and the perils of social media use in kids, and we did a lot of that, a couple of stories in the lead up before Australia's world-leading social media ban. And we're going to have a bit of a chat about that today, of course, but we've also been doing things a little bit differently on the Extra Minutes podcast of late. We'll be reading through, quite ironically, your comments on those stories found on social media, and our long-running viewers of 60 Minutes will remember it's a little bit of a callback to Peter Harvey's mailbag.
When I went to school, the bullies waited for their victims at the front gate. But in these high-tech days, the tormentors can actually get into their victims' homes. And judging by your letters, Ali's not the only one to find that out. Having been bullied over the internet, I was a wreck. At 14, born into the world of technology, it's difficult to get a break from the torment. Maybe if we victims band together, we can stand up and defend ourselves.
So, and that was in 2008, already talking about bullying on technology. Now you throw social media into the mix, and you know the families we've spoken to just experienced some awful tragedy. 17 odd years later, young kids dying because of that bullying following them home. It's awful.
That's right. Fast forward 17 years later, what's changed in that time as well is kids having, not just the internet, but smartphones with social media apps where the kids are chatting and messaging and you're just always on. There's no other better case to show about how bullying was happening on social media apps than the death of 12-year-old Charlotte O'Brien, who sadly took her own life, and whose parents, Matt and Kelly, were absolutely instrumental. And we were there in Canberra at Parliament House on the day that the Prime Minister announced that he would be putting in a ban for social media for kids 16 years and under.
And the ban was polarising then. It remains polarising. We'll get to that with a lot of our viewers' comments, of course. But what I found is speaking to parents like Charlotte's, and we spoke to a lot of families, even though obviously kids' mental health is complex and a lot of causes, it was really difficult, I know, for me, speaking to those parents and not understanding and siding with their need, just to have a little bit of a help from policymakers where they could actually, they feel like if it was different and the ban was in place then, they would have been able to say to Charlotte, no, look, it's banned, it's against the law, so therefore she wouldn't be alone in her room having that bullying follow her on their screen, on social media, where the parents really wouldn't be able to do anything at that point. That's sadly what's happened.
Absolutely. And a lot of these apps at the time as well was, the bullying was taking place, but the messages disappear too. So there was no record in some cases about what had actually transpired as well. But yes, and how many people did we speak to, and some of them we interviewed, but it was a similar thing time and time again where something had happened to the children, and when they found their kids next to them, in one case still recording, was the phone open on the social media app.
It's often after they've sat them down at the kitchen table, they might have come home, and there were examples of this. They've been bullied at school, they've come home, sat down with their parents and explained it. Their parents talked them through it, then they've sent them off to bed thinking, oh yeah, she's fine, we've talked her through it, and then tragically the next morning they're confronted with that, and there's really nothing they could have done. And then you've got parents in this awful grief trying to figure out what they could have done differently, and you can't imagine they would have been able to do more than what they did.
That's right. And I think, there was at the time, how will Australia enforce this? How well will it work? And will it actually be a possibility? There'd been some examples overseas, but Australia was going to be the world's first country to ban social media. But it was like, how do you, as a political leader, sit and talk to people like Kelly and Matt and say, we're not going to do this? It was, I think they were always going to be successful in their quest, and it was Charlotte's last wish to have her story told. And despite losing her 2 months before we filmed with her, they somehow mustered the courage to talk to us.
One of them was, please share my story to raise awareness. So that's why we're here.
That note that she wrote in a moment of absolute despair is the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. And I can tell you, it's hard. You don't want to. We have that sense of responsibility to her. And if we can, again, just stop it from happening again to somebody else, then maybe this is Charlotte's wish.
Yeah, that's one of the interviews I'll always remember. They were still in the pits of their grief. They still would be. You don't come back from that. But you can't, as a politician, sit there with them in front of you and say no, really. And look, the response to the ban has been largely positive, not just here, but overseas. So one of the comments here, the social media ban for under 16s could be one of the greatest laws of this generation. A lot of people would agree with that. This one is from Australia. This next one, my oldest boy, 18, described as going straight from the playground to the internet. I know the implementation of Australia's social media ban is going to be problematic, but it gives me real hope for our 3.5-year-old, and clearly their parents are now feeling empowered, aren't they, where they have the support of the government. It's not just left for them to sit down with their kids who are probably banging on the door saying, no, everyone's on social media, everyone in the playground, I can't go to school and be an outcast not being on it. Now they can say, well, no one's on it, no one's supposed to be on it, so please don't touch it.
Absolutely. And I think, that was it for parents, going back to what you said. It's a minefield for parents to try and navigate this and understand it. And then, kids are so much more tech savvy than their parents, and they would be finding ways around it. So, I think overwhelmingly there was that support for the ban. But of course, before we did that program, there was one that we did before, which was when people were just starting to call for it. And that's where we featured Jonathan Haidt, who was the social psychologist who was the man with the research that was saying something's not right with our kids.
Author of The Anxious Generation, and I'm really privileged that we got to chat to him. I've even had messages from an old colleague of mine, a young dad, who said, I'm so jealous that you're able to pick his brain, because as parents, a lot of people have read that book, a bestseller, and really was a catalyst for talking about even the possibility of Australia's social media ban. There's a debate with his research, and we addressed this with him at the time. Is it correlation or causation? A bit of criticism he had at the time in the release of that book, and the evidence that he presents is, yes, it's clearly linked. All the increases in poor mental health in kids came at the time when the smartphone was introduced, and there was clear correlation, and he had to be at pains to point out that, yes, okay, it's not absolute concrete proof, but how can you look at that and not think what he thinks?
Something happened globally that sent mental health spiraling down.
Professor Hyde says what happened was the transition from the phone to the smartphone.
A new iPhone, 3G.
The only theory on the table for why you'd have a global change is the massive change in their daily lives when they adopted a phone-based childhood, based on having a smartphone, the front-facing camera, social media, and high-speed internet.
It wasn't just one country, it was several countries around the world. And you did just see, in terms of rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, it was kind of like this, and then suddenly it just starts climbing up across several different countries. And it was all around that 2010 period. And he was saying, well, what changed then? It was the moment we went from the phones that were, bricks and typing text and little screens to the smartphones. And then of course they've, the apps came, and then they've obviously found their way into our children's hands as well.
It's worth pointing out too that it was particularly the case, that increase in poor mental health with young girls, and that was the case over all of those countries, be it the US, Australia, Nordic countries, Europe. And when you have that correlation, the same spike in every country, it's really hard to argue against, and hence we've got that social media ban. And just on Jonathan Haidt, a lot of our viewers have had very positive opinions of him and what he had to say on our program. Here's a few comments. Your work has helped me in my mission to mentor at-risk boys in New Jersey, middle and high schools. Thank you. And this is written directly to Jonathan Haidt in some cases. Your book has been my inspiration. You're on the right track. Thank you. I've read your book and have experienced anecdotally in my students just what you claim. And another one here, reading your book, The Anxious Generation now, as someone who has been teaching for almost 30 years, your book describes exactly what we've been seeing. So everyone backing up what he says with their own little anecdotal evidence that young kids do struggle if they're exposed to social media.
And that's what he was saying. He's saying we have robbed children of their childhood, the traditional playground, play-based childhood, and we're warping their minds. I mean, that was that's the alarm that he was sounding. But it wasn't just him. I mean, you have had Facebook insiders like Frances Haugen, who released many documents, hundreds of documents, and some of them related to Instagram and the harms that that they knew at Meta it was causing, in particular, young girls around things like body image and things like that. And they were very well aware with their own internal research of the harms that were being inflicted by their platforms.
What those documents showed was that Facebook knew its products were causing harm to kids, that they had run experiments trying to mitigate those harms and chosen not to launch them.
So to put it really bluntly, they put profits before kids.
They unquestionably put profits before kids. They refused to take responsibility. I think Facebook needs to declare moral bankruptcy.
One young girl who talked very much about how Instagram had impacted her mental health and she feels exacerbated her eating disorder was Katia. And she'd started an account at 13 years of age, lied, got an account, and it was during COVID when she was wanting to do what she described as a glow up and get fit and get healthy. And through researching then, her Instagram started feeding her a steady diet of posts that were all about body image, recipes, low calorie recipes. And, she was just privy to that constant bombardment by that. And she said when we interviewed her that if it wasn't for that, she doesn't think her eating disorder would have been as exacerbated as it was.
Absolutely. And that's the problem with social media specifically, are those algorithms. And it's interesting you bring that up because there is an argument out there that, we shouldn't ban things. We should be asking the big minds, the leaders of these tech companies to show some leadership and maybe just change the way social media platforms operate. Get rid of those algorithms so then social media could be used the way it was initially meant for, where kids can socialise. There's been a bit of criticism you brought up with me earlier in regional areas of Australia. How are kids supposed to socialise if they don't have that connection online? But it's a romantic way to look at it. It would be, in a perfect world, it would have those tech companies taking some leadership and going, okay, no, this is clearly harming kids. These algorithms, will get rid of those and we'll go back to what it was supposed to be. But they're businesses. They keep people on these social media platforms before the ban, children, very young children, because they're giving them things they want. And sadly, often with young girls and even young boys with some eating disorders, that's content after content after content, videos of kids promoting and even encouraging not eating well or being healthy, and that's where it leads to tragedy. Absolutely.
And even though I think sometimes there was cases where they did try and clean up some of that content, it just gets morphed into something else, and examples that Katia showed me, which were, around tricks of how to avoid eating and things like that, just were, kind of changed and reworked. So you didn't search for this anymore, you searched for that, and that same material came up. So interestingly, though, despite the fact that she agreed that social media had contributed to her deteriorating health, she didn't agree that a ban would work. So there was, and she had started to use it again and felt like she had more control over it.
I think it's unrealistic to expect that responsibility to be placed on the users of these platforms, because people are always going to find a way, as Mum says, but it's more about education and promoting positive content and removing negative content.
But we also spoke to Rob, whose daughter Liv knew Katia, and her story was absolutely terrible. She'd lost her life, and he was very much on the other side, where he did absolutely, and was, he was at that point saying the government needs to do something. They were able to, to look at what Howard did with the guns after Port Arthur, and this is another watershed moment that we have to act.
Yeah, and it remains a debate about how effective a social media ban is. So the figures that came out recently from the social media platforms involved in the ban, what was it, almost 5 million accounts have been cancelled because they've been deemed to be under 16, which is obviously a sign that the ban is working as it's intended. But at the same time, you're also hearing about kids using VPNs to get around it. They're putting things like, this is my mother's account, so then they're not kicked off. There are clearly loopholes that they're already exploiting. Kids are smart. They learn technology really quickly, and they are going to get around it. But I guess that is, at this point, seeming like the minority, not the majority of kids.
Yeah. Although I have to say, I did over the Christmas period have a friend request from a friend's 13-year-old boy asking if I would like to be friends with him
So he's
on
figured it
social
out.
media.
Yeah.
And I thought, uh-oh, how are you still not on this? And I actually asked his mum, I said, have your children, have their accounts, and they are still operating. So obviously
even
still a lot more
TikToks.
work to be done.
Absolutely.
There.
And they'll get around it. And also reading there are TikTok accounts where they're sharing ways for people to be able to get around it. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And there's even a hashtag, isn't there? What's the hashtag that people are putting up?
Hashtag I survived the ban.
So
Yeah.
And kids will be kids, and if you take something away from them, if their friends are getting on it somehow, they're going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think broadly, and I'm saying this as someone who's spoken to parents in their grief, but also parents who want to protect their kids from what they've seen, they really appreciate the help to be able to, at the very least, turn to their kids and go, it's illegal. And even if they get around that, even if they go, mum and dad, or whatever, I'm going to find my way onto social media. At least they feel empowered.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we did speak to Professor Amanda Third, who's, a researcher who looks and studies how children interact with technology and their behaviours. And, she did have concerns. I mean, she was incredibly sympathetic to the families that were calling and petitioning the Prime Minister for this ban, absolutely, and does not think that platforms should have had a free for all. But she did say that she had concerns that, kids would find ways around using VPN or moving to other platforms. And her concern was that could make it even, more unsafe for children as well. So, and I suppose that was the thing with Australia being the first country, is that, there is nothing to look at and to compare. So I suppose we're in the middle of an experiment that we will have to see, what happens moving forward.
Absolutely, and some comments echo that, no doubt. There are negative comments about the ban, just to pull out a few here. They say it's for the kids' safety, yet they didn't do the same with pornography, games. This is how they insert themselves into the lives of children and prepare them for an adulthood full of government control. Another one, Australia's under 16 ban. May I please apologise to the world for being the first nation to appear to protect under 16s with a social media ban, when in fact, and the world's media did not pick this up, we all, including adults, have to sign up to the digital ID so that we can be tracked. And obviously privacy is a major concern. It was Amanda Third, who we spoke to, brought this up. When you have to put in authentication, that's ID, that's facial recognition, that is a privacy issue. A lot of people will not like that, and we need to acknowledge that.
That's right. And I think you asked her at the time, though, don't they already have all that information
And
about
do.
us? And her response was yes, but not on the scale that this that will occur under this ban.
Yeah, good to chat to you, Anne.
Yeah, good to chat to you too.
It's complex. We could speak for hours and hours and hours at this. I'm sure it's a conversation that a lot of families had over Christmas and use and continue to have every night. But like I said, hopefully it empowers parents at the very least to say, look, we've got all this evidence now and there's a ban in place. So if you don't want your kids to be on social media, you have that backing. If you do want your kids to be on social media, you can also help them get on it with parental control as well. So at the end of the day, it is up to parents still, but we'll see what plays out. It's an experiment, as you say.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll be there to follow
Exactly
where the story goes.
Indeed. You can catch up on those stories that we aired before the social media ban on our YouTube channel, as well as 9Now.